All right, what is going on, guys? It is Austin and Chris with the Kids podcast, kicking incredibly dope stats, a 2019 to 2020 football season fantasy podcast. I am joined with my cousin and stat maestro, Chris Smith. Um,
Maestro.
yeah,
Ooh,
smart guy.
ooh,
It was smarter than I.
fancy.
He
Wow,
put it that way.
high
Um,
praise.
so yeah, with our podcast, we're just looking to discuss the things that maybe the ESPN app will not be able to show you from the surface. Do a little bit more of a deep dive and a outside the lines look at some fantasy stuff, and kind of look at what's happened in the past, and kind of use that to predict the future, because that's all this is.
That's all we can do.
That's all we can do. We can hope.
Yep.
Um, so I'd say the best thing to go into is why are we doing this podcast, or why you had approached me to have the idea that we should do this.
Yeah.
We've been doing fantasy together for, well, I
Very long
think I
now.
think just over 10 years.
Yeah.
Given the Facebook memories,
Yeah.
I think it's slightly over 10 years. So why are we doing the podcast now?
Well, I would say to start off, I started fantasy. I think it was 2006. I remember my first team. I had Steve McNair on the Ravens and Terrell Owens on the Cowboys. So it's been a long time coming. I've been playing fantasy for now nearly 15 years. Feels
Yeah, you're
crazy.
basically in the Hall of Fame talks at this point.
It feels crazy because I haven't been on this earth that long, only 22 years old. But yeah, I started pretty young, got into it, and I mean, we're always talking fantasy, whether it's me and you or whether we're talking with our friends. So I kind of just wanted a platform to give other people some of that information.
Yeah, we've been, whether it was playing football games or playing football outside, or even at the super young age that we were, even still being able to have the attention to follow a game.
Yeah,
Football's been like, it's been our thing. Like, if you think about, I was thinking
always.
about this the other day. Like, it wasn't like unnatural for us to be playing like Madden '04 during the summer. And like,
Yeah,
when I think to that, you were what, seven, six,
seven.
or it would have came out in '03, so you were six.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like we were young. Like, so football's
Yeah.
always been the thing. So,
And
um,
whether it was the Madden games or I was just always a big like stat nerd back in the day, I would
oh yeah,
always collect the football cards,
the
baseball cards, and
encyclopedia you
everything.
had, the thing was
Yeah,
that thick textbook.
yeah. So
Um, so yeah, that's definitely like a big reason for us wanting to do this, is that football's just been such a big part of what we enjoy doing. It's such a hobby that it's really a passion, more than
yeah,
anything. So I'd say that's definitely what we love about fantasy, and what we love about football. And personally, what my favorite thing about fantasy is just the unknown and the risk, because you can listen. Up until probably like 2 or 3 seasons ago, I didn't even do any studying or research. I just kind of
yeah.
went based on
Pick the
names.
players you liked and
Yeah, I just
let it
had
ride.
I just had teams based on who I liked. They were mostly Colts theme teams, and I mean, it was really like
How
a
can I draft a Colt in every single position?
yeah. I mean, I was basically, if the Colts are good, so was I, and if they weren't, neither was I. So
Yeah,
that was what my fantasy experience. And then obviously, um, ESPN having a big, kind of, it seemed like a very sudden surge. Maybe it's just because we hit an age,
it,
but it seemed like
I,
fantasy really hit a surge.
what it was, it felt like ESPN as like a company and an industry kind of embraced fantasy and
Yeah,
really gave it like the mainstream push that it never got. You saw like mainstream coverage on ESPN itself. They would do like the 24-hour fantasy football marathons, which I'm sure they still do.
yeah.
Like so I think they embraced it more, which in turn definitely feels like it's a lot more in the mainstream now and a lot more widely played.
Yeah, I mean, you look on, TV shows such as NFL Network and things like that. Like, they're discussing fantasy numbers as much as actual stats, which is
Absolutely.
like such a cool thing that we're in the
And just
heart of
and having
fantasy.
not to cut you off, but and having shows dedicated to fantasy
Oh
itself,
yeah. I mean,
which is awesome.
the coolest thing about Sunday Ticket is I'm really like a red zone guy, but like they have a fantasy zone, and like you can literally
Yeah,
watch football through the eyes of fantasy, and it's like so cool that football's really been divided into, not divided, but almost like split into these two realms. So that's definitely what I think the big draw is, and being able to have
per-
something to study almost. I know you're definitely. I mean, my boy Chris studies this stuff. I mean, it really
yeah.
it's I'm
I
proud for him. Like this is like it's crazy the amount of homework that goes into the stuff. More for
yeah,
DFS than anything. I
absolutely.
mean, I know you do it for the daily stuff. Um,
Yeah,
you
because
and
that's where, when you're playing, like you said with DFS, when you're playing against millions and millions of players, you got to find an edge somewhere. And my whole thing is, you see these professional gamblers and whatnot that do DraftKings and whatnot for a living, and they're available with all the same information as us. Any of us can get that edge if we just grind hard enough and do enough research. So that's kind of been my whole mindset with that.
Yeah, I mean a big part of that is just I noticed last year as I started kind of like doing like very minimal studying is like you can really see what I mean, you can use the past weeks to see what's going to happen next. I mean, you have
Absolutely.
these certain stats like, let's say quarterback A really loves throwing to the tight end. Well, then that's a tight end you want. It's plain and simple. But
Yeah.
it's that analogy, but in every position. What cornerback plays the left side of the field versus the right side of the field? Okay, well, what wide receiver that he's versing that week lines up on that side? It's things that are
That's
literally so simple when you think about it. It's like, oh, okay, corner plays on the left side, wide receiver plays on the left side. They're up against each other. But
yeah.
like
And
the average person would not care to look
to look
that
into
deep.
that.
And it's not even
And
that deep.
it isn't, but it's so valuable, and that's something I've subscribed to ESPN Plus the past couple of years just to get Mike Clay's wide receiver cornerback matchup, because that information is so valuable. You get how much percentage like the wide receiver is lining up on, say, the left side or the right side of the line of scrimmage. Same with the cornerbacks. So then you can pretty easily predict what the matchups are going to be. And then you also get the information of like how much yards per route run is this cornerback giving up? Is he a good cornerback, bad cornerback? It's really easily digestible information, and you can really easily tell like which matchups you should be targeting. And it's like it's almost how in the NFL, like rookies say, like once you get past the rookie wall, the game slows down for you. It's like when you're playing DFS or when you're just like doing fantasy or whatnot. Once you're privy to this information that like no, you feel like not a lot of other people have. It's like everything slows down for you. You just feel like you're like in the zone in a sense. If that
Yeah,
makes
there's
sense.
there's so many people on the fantasy landscape. Mike Clay being like probably the first that the cornerback matchup that Chris had just mentioned. That one piece of literature that's put out every week, he actually discusses it in his podcast too, which is free. That one segment and that one like piece of information is probably single-handedly one of the biggest edges you can give yourself, and it's about 5 to 10 minutes of looking it over. You don't even have to dive
Easy,
deep
and
into it.
and it's $5 a month. It's
Yeah,
like say
ESPN's not even expensive.
you put away $1.25 a week, and
Yeah,
you give yourself such an edge every single week, whether it's daily fantasy or whether you're like in just a home league and you want to see somebody on the waiver wire that might be worth picking up that week, or who you should start or who you should bench. It's really valuable stuff, and it's great work that he does for sure.
yeah. So that amount of homework and that amount of studying that we have started to put into it, I think kind of gives us an edge on being able to relay the information, in easier terms because I think um, I'd say a majority of our yearly league that we do annually, I'd say that probably 60 to 80% of it is the average fantasy like user.
Yeah,
They're not people that dive super deep. They look at what's on the app and that's what they go by.
yeah. They'll click on the player card and they'll
Yep.
watch the video at the bottom of the player and get the very basic info, but they don't really try and dive deep beyond that.
Yeah, and I think what I would probably
That's a lot
guess
of
that's
50
probably
players. That's probably
75% of the fantasy world.
absolutely. I'd say like 75 to 80% of players probably.
So, what we're trying to do and what I think we actually do a good job of even in our within our friend group is just being that middle ground between the beginner and the advanced. Because we've both kind of taken these steps in the past couple of years um, in that area.
Yeah, trying to expand our knowledge of the game and just make fantasy, which is such an unpredictable sport, a little more predictable, you
Yeah,
know?
make it an educated guess as to just a
Yeah,
dart throw.
absolutely.
But with that, let's step into our first segment, which we're gonna kind of go down the roster as to how we look at this, and we're gonna start off with the conductor, if you will, the quarterback, and Chris and I both have our rankings, but let's take a look at who we think is gonna be the elite. Let's say our top three,
Okay.
and let's take a look at who. Let's just say one, what quarterback really jumps outside that top five, maybe even outside that top 10. So why don't you start with who you're high on this year?
All right. So you said top three. I'll give you my top four because that would round out my first two tiers of quarterbacks.
Okay.
I have Pat Mahomes number one. I mean, pretty easy. Most people probably consensus there.
Yeah,
And
there's almost no wiggle room. I feel like it's hard to say that he's not.
well, he had an 8.6% touchdown rate in 2018, which is bound to come down. It happens every time a quarterback puts up one of these historic seasons. Like for instance, in Deshaun Watson's rookie year, he had, I believe it was like a 9.4% touchdown rate. And then last year it came down to like 5.7, and he was the number four quarterback last year. So
Yeah.
I think we could say we're going to expect a little regression for Pat Mahomes. But with that being said, we still expect the Chiefs to be the best offense in football.
Yeah, I mean, they're the weapons that they have, especially I mean, the Tyreek non-suspension is
Huge.
probably one of the biggest like things to happen in fantasy in so long to
I
where
actually I actually had Watson number one before that happened.
yeah,
Just assuming Tyreek was going to be suspended like 4 to 8 games. When I saw no suspension, it was you had to put
it's a
Mahomes
light
back at
switch.
number
Yeah,
one.
it's a
Yeah,
totally different thing. Yeah, I mean it's hard to say that Pat Mahomes isn't going to be your number one between Kelsey, who I mean is just such a dominant tight end. He's
yeah,
he
the
is
best.
he is what he is. He really is the best. Especially with Gronk out of the NFL, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say he's the best in the NFL right now. You have Tyreek Hill, that's lightning in a bottle on the field. I mean, no one can seem to
Takes the
catch up
top
to
off
him.
the defense. And
Yeah,
defense, you have to have two people on him at all times. It opens up the middle of the field for Kelsey, for Watkins to do some work. Damian Williams with the screen game. He does he is so critical of that offense, and it really can't be overstated enough.
yeah. So I totally agree with him at number one. Who do we have on your rounding out your
Those
top two tiers?
Yeah, so I have Watson at number two, as I was just saying. He was my number one before the news that Hill wasn't suspended. So the Texans took two offensive linemen with their first three picks in the draft,
Yeah,
and so it showed a team that realized their offensive line problems, that they can't let Deshaun Watson just get killed like he did last year. I remember the story last year that he actually had like a collapsed lung and he couldn't take a plane to like a road game, so he had to go by car. Like how crazy is that?
yeah.
Because their
That's
line was so
that's
bad.
some
They
Andrew Luck story right there.
exactly,
they
exactly.
didn't have to look far to see that the offensive line is it's crucial for these young quarterbacks and getting
Yeah.
behind them is so big. So yeah,
And
I
just
I
keeping
see
him
that.
healthy. You know, he's such a talent. We got to keep him healthy. So hopefully those two picks, it was Titus Howard and Max Scarping. I'm not exactly sure how they were viewed as prospects. I actually think it wasn't exactly graded as the best picks, but you never know with that stuff, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I
I've
feel like
seen Pat
offense.
Mahomes get a C grade
Yeah,
by some people,
yeah,
so
exactly. I mean, and you see with offensive linemen too, you can have people that are projected to be the first offensive lineman taken, and then you have people that no one even knows in the draft, and they wind up being elite. So it's
exactly.
one of those positions where the how hard they work is really going to show. It's not really just It's not a name so much as like with wide receivers and quarterbacks.
Absolutely. So I'll try and be a little quicker on my next two here. This is my second tier of quarterbacks, and I have number three, Andrew Luck, number four, Aaron Rodgers.
Okay.
So for number three, Andrew Luck, he could have definitely been in that first tier of quarterbacks for me. It was it was hard to keep him out, but it just felt easier because he doesn't have that running upside that a Pat Mahomes or Deshaun Watson has at this point in his career. Like he used to have it earlier in his career, but we saw that last year. The Colts are trying to keep him
There were
healthy,
so
which
many times
makes a lot of
last
sense.
year. Yeah, there were so many times last year, and I watched the Colts games really closely. There's so many times where he was like running into the end zone and dipped out at the 2 yard line and just didn't want that
Yeah.
goal line contact.
And
And
it's smart. It's
it
what
really is.
RG3 never was able to adapt to. It's the way you keep your body healthy when you're playing against these physical freaks on defense. So it's a smart move by him, but it's what for me keeps him just out of that like elite tier at quarterback. And then number four, Aaron Rodgers. So last year he was coming off of, I believe like a really long time low in touchdown percentage, which it's just bound to regress back to the mean. They fired Mike McCarthy, where it was just a really stale offense
I
for a
think that's
while
so
there.
big for him.
Yeah, and they get an offensive-minded coach in Matt LaFleur, whose offense did still wasn't what we were expecting in Tennessee last season, but I'm willing to give him another chance with arguably the best quarterback in the NFL still. And to the touchdown percentage note, he was at 4.2% last year, and for his career, he's a 6.2% touchdown guy. So we can
Yeah,
expect him to
he's gonna
come
come
up.
up.
He should be around 30 to 35 touchdowns we can expect. So I think he's going to be the Aaron Rodgers that we've come to know. But just to give credence to the other side of the argument, last year he was actually over the last four seasons 7.1 yards per attempt for Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
So it's been that's where I think the offense has just been stale. It hasn't been what he's wanted to run. I think when you still look at the tape, he can make every throw. He can do anything you want in a quarterback. So
Yeah, I mean, you see quarterbacks, and usually after that first injury, they lose a step. Second injury,
yeah,
they're kind of off a cliff. By the third injury, usually, I mean, I don't even know many quarterbacks that can make it to their third injury. And you look at Aaron Rodgers, who just seems to, I mean, this dude goes down for a season and comes back like nothing happened.
yeah,
And
same guy,
it's hard,
same
yeah, it's hard to
sophomore.
say that like, oh, I don't know how he's going to be after injury or not playing well or something like that. I I really I have him in
I
I
think
have him
that
in my top five as well.
I
And
think that to your point, I think that honestly makes his case better for this season. The fact that he was playing with a broken, I believe it was like a broken bone in his back since week one of last year, and something with his knee, right? Was it
it
back
was
and knee?
so he last year he had a bruised collarbone.
Oh
He had
boy.
an issue in his lower back. I don't know which
Okay.
side, but I know it was his lower back, and he had a calf injury.
Yeah.
Three
So
injuries in 1 year that he was
and it,
playing through most of them.
and they were all sustained in that week one game. So I think we can expect him. He was still at 19.5 points per game last year. So it's not like he was bad by any means, but
No, I mean, and you look who he had around him. I really think that like I don't think he's
I
gonna
think
have
we
a
can
bad year.
take. I think we can expect like a step up from Valdez Scantling. I mean, we'll get to wide receivers later, but I actually do like him in the later rounds, and I think um, just overall he's going to be more comfortable doing what he wants to do, not being stuck in that slow like Mike McCarthy offense where it's never a good thing when the play caller and the head coach are like clashing. You
And
know
not
you don't
even being
want that.
quiet about it.
Being
Everyone
very
knew they
vocal
didn't
to the
like each
media.
other.
It was the worst kept secret in the NFL.
Yeah.
So I think we're gonna get like an angry. I mean, I'm not one to play down narrative street often because it's not very reliable. But I think just getting like a fired up, ready to prove it, Aaron Rodgers, and when you look at the rest of the quarterbacks from him on, he's still in that elite tier for me. I think when you still, like I said earlier, you watch the film, he could still make all the throws. I think if he's just in the right environment, he has massive upside.
Yeah.
So, What was your question after rounding out the top four? Just who
So
was
once
somebody later, like as
So
a
once,
sleeper
yeah,
you
once
like?
we look at our elite, who's someone that you see as someone that's going to fall off? Someone that we may have viewed as maybe not an
Okay.
elite, but a top, let's say top five ish, top 5 to 10 that you maybe aren't so high on.
So this is someone that was definitely a top five quarterback last year. Russell Wilson. I actually coming into the season, I didn't even have him in my top 12 quarterbacks, and I've been fighting actually. I've been slowly moving him up a little by little. I have him at number 11 right now, but even number 11 is probably a lot lower than a lot of people have him. I know like Evan Silva for one has him like quarterback 6. But
Yeah,
for me, it's the volume is such a concern for me. The Seahawks were such a run heavy team last year, and last year he got so lucky with the touchdown. You're gonna hear me with the quarterbacks mention touchdown rate a lot, but he was at
it's what
8
matters.
points.
That's what gets us the points. I mean, at the end
Yeah,
of the day, touchdown, it's what matters.
and it's something that's very predictive where if you look at somebody's touchdown rate for his career and you just see like a stark outlier, it's probably like it's your best guess that he's probably going to go back to the mean. And for Russell Wilson last year at 8.2%, when he's a career 6% touchdown rate, we're going to have
Yeah.
to expect that to regress a little bit. I mean, he threw for 3,400 yards last year. And I think that's actually going to go up a little bit. I think maybe their defense isn't going to be quite as good this year as it was last year. I think their defense actually overperformed a little bit last year.
Hmm.
But even with that being said, I still think the volume is a major concern. He only attempted 427 passes last year.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I'll kind of do what you did, but in reverse. So with my fall off, just to touch on your Russell Wilson, I have him at 10 personally. I know you said you have him at 11.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I have him at 10 too. I'm slightly higher on him. Obviously, rankings will say that, but even mentality, I do think he's going to have a better season than I think that you're picturing. I
Yep.
think them getting DK Metcalf is big. I feel like having a big
He is
target. I
he
feel
is the
like it's
perfect receiver for that offense.
yeah. I feel like when the play is breaking down, Russell Wilson scrambling out, and he throws a ball up. Like, do you want Tyler Lockett or do you want the Hulk? And
Yeah.
like, it's
Or
just it,
240 of just
yeah,
pure
it's one of those things where it's like you
gold.
don't have to dig that deep into seeing that they needed a big target that
Yeah.
is just going to be the help for him. Honestly,
And he
his
can
his
take the
blanket.
top off the defense where the Seattle, like their offense is just backyard football, where it's Russell Wilson buy time for like
Yeah,
5 seconds and then hit somebody going downfield 30 yards. DK Metcalf is meant for that kind of football.
yeah,
He is
that's
he is meant for running a straight line and will hit you like in 30 yards.
yeah,
You know,
that's the one saving grace that I think. And let's say they totally ignore it and just pretend like he's not on the team. Then yeah, he's gonna have a terrible season.
yeah.
I mean, really, I think without utilizing the rookie talent, no one has film on him in the
Yeah.
NFL. No one knows what to expect. Um, I think that's what we can expect. But my person that I think falls off, while I do have him actually ranked slightly higher than Russell Wilson, someone that I think in fantasy production, but definitely in NFL stat production, is actually Drew Brees.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
so many people
Absolutely. He's being
really
so overdrafted right now. I don't
yeah,
get it.
I think people are drafting the name, sadly, and they're not
Definitely.
drafting the stats. And in fantasy, you draft stats, you don't draft names.
Yeah.
And Drew Brees, a couple things. I think while Alvin Kamara is a great running back, I think losing Mark Ingram, I feel like that 1-2 punch may upset his ability to throw to the running back a little bit. I think it may get a little too predictable. And while Michael Thomas is obviously an elite wide receiver, they're coming off a extremely upsetting loss. They're like still really hung up on this, and teams that have
Do you
had
think that
these
could motivate them?
no, I don't.
No?
Teams that have had this happen to them in recent history. We look at the Jags with the Patriots
Yeah.
game. They went 5-11 the season following that.
Yeah.
And they were a team that was playing to be in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, it's Blake Bortles, but still, that defense could have carried him. And it did. Then the year after that, we look at the Vikings, who had the the Vikings had their huge fall off after that game. It's one of those things where I don't know their exact record, but I know they didn't make the playoffs the next season. Also, they
Yeah.
had the quarterback change and everything, but they're a team that really should have made the Super Bowl, or at least, I mean, performed better in the game. They fell off. So I really think that with that upsetting loss, they're not going to get over it. They're actually, and this was
Well,
as of what today's Tuesday. This was as of yesterday.
Tuesday, July
Um,
30th.
yeah, they're as of yesterday they were getting Roger Goodell to come in and give like
Oh, they're
I can't think of the name, but they're bringing him in court for suing the NFL for the call on the play. They're not
they're
over
not
it.
over it. No,
No, they're so
they
far
are
from over
they
it
are
that
literally the Houston Rockets right now, level of salty, where
yeah,
they're just not over it. But I would say you kind of like it's different circumstances, but they dealt with a heartbreaking loss the season before too, with
yeah,
the Vikings. Remember with the
yes,
Stephon Diggs miracle.
yeah,
So like they have a good head coach. They still have like a good Drew Brees is still a good veteran quarterback. I'm not as concerned with like team problems where I am just the volume. It's the same thing with Russell Wilson. And the problem with Drew Brees is he's going to give you nothing with his legs, like an
no,
absolute zero.
no,
So, ready for this? The last two seasons, he's been at 536 and then 489 attempts. And that's just not good enough. Like
no,
the last four seasons before that, it was 673, 627, 659, 650. Like he used to throw the ball a ton, and the Saints have cut back on their passing a ton.
yeah,
And last year, four rushing touchdowns from Drew Brees. Like, are you really expecting four rushing touchdowns from Drew Brees? I know
no.
I'm
Deshaun
not.
Watson had
So,
5. Let's put it
so
that way.
yeah. So I think we can say that's probably gonna regress a little bit. He's gonna be around 490 to 500 attempts. It's just it's not elite quarterback status, and right now he's being drafted as the eighth quarterback off the board, and I don't think it makes any sense. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna be really excited when in our draft somebody takes Drew Brees as like the eighth quarterback because
Oh
it's
yeah,
gonna happen. It's gonna happen. I see it happen all the time in these best ball drafts even that I've been doing. Me and you have both been doing, and I just don't understand. I don't even have him ranked in my top 12.
yeah.
Like
I
I'm out
have
on
him
Drew
at
Brees. I'm
9
out.
just because of the tools around him,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's it could move before week 1.
Yeah.
But as of right now, I just I slightly have him up there for the name, which I know I said isn't enough of a reason, but he threw 5 picks last year and had 29 total touchdowns. I'm sorry, yeah, 20,
32
36.
touchdowns.
Yeah,
Yeah,
32 passing
36
and 4
total,
rushing.
32 pass. Yeah, yeah,
And only 5 picks. I mean, those are still very elite stats
yeah.
in that area. But I really I really don't think they're over the play against the Rams. I think that when
I mean,
something that toxic is in the
uh,
locker room, I mean, right after the game, Drew Brees said he was over it and like that they needed to move on, but the
that's what
rest
I
of the
would.
team didn't.
I was gonna say I would just if you're betting like I would bet on Drew Brees keeping that team together. I feel like he's like
He got him
enough
through a hurricane.
positive.
I mean, this should be
Yeah,
nothing.
ex- exactly.
And then going back into to who the elite are, I mean, it's a pretty. You covered the elite talents. The one person that did sneak up into my top 5, I have him at 4. I did a little shuffling around, but I have him at 4 right now. Is Matt Ryan, which I think a lot of people don't really have him in that range. I think a lot of people have him in probably that 7 to 10 area.
I
Uh,
have him at 8.
yeah,
So, and it's interesting. I started out the season with him at 5, and as the off seasons progressed, the problem with Matt Ryan, he's just a little boring, you know?
he's very
Like
boring.
he might finish top 5, but he'll probably finish top 5 because of injury. Because we know a couple quarterbacks are going to get injured. They're going to
Yep.
miss a few games. Matt Ryan's going to play 16 games, and over the last 8 seasons, he's had 4,000 yards every single season and 25 plus touchdowns in 6 of 8. So like you're getting consistency. For me, I don't know if we're getting the highest ups. It's all contingent on Devontae Freeman's health.
I
Because if
completely agree.
Devontae Freeman is healthy, they want to run the ball more, and they showed it in the draft. They drafted two offensive linemen in the first uh, I think it was first two rounds or something along those lines. They invested heavily into their offensive line, so they showed they want to run the ball again. But say if Devontae Freeman gets injured in week 3, they could totally just become the pass heaviest team with
Oh
some
yeah.
of the best assets in the league, and Matt Ryan all of a sudden has top 3 upside. So
Yeah, it really depends on where their split in the run pass game goes. But I
yeah,
think when you have tools like Julio Jones,
Calvin
I'm
Ridley,
Calvin Ridley,
Alex
who I'm
Sanu, Austin
hugely high
Hooper.
on. I mean, they have really, really good weapons. And I mean, you look at teams like the Rams last year, who, when you can go 4 and 5 players deep into your receiving threats, you can just
It's
pick one,
valuable.
and yeah, you can pick one. And that's what I like more about having Matt Ryan than I do having his targets is he can throw it anywhere. So
Yeah,
that's one reason that I'm higher on him, and then everyone
I would
else you kind of covered: Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson. I mean, I think that is the consensus. Everyone thinks they're
top
going to be
4.
very good.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean
yeah. It's
it's
got to be, right? You
yeah.
know.
There, I mean, there's no way Kyler Murray's a top 3, right? Wink face, you know.
I mean, I trust me. I think we all want to be high on Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
I would say just to end off that Matt Ryan point, the 3 people I have in between, I have Ryan at 8. So my 5, 6, 7 was Wentz, Newton, and Baker Mayfield, and we could very easily see Wentz and Newton getting hurt.
Oh yeah.
Baker. So like I'm saying, the path road for Matt Ryan to being top 5
He
quarterback
could
is
jump those
not very
3
difficult. But I
in
just
one week.
think
Yeah.
the upside of like a Cam Newton, we saw it weeks 1 through 9 last year. Cam was the number 4 quarterback before he hurt his shoulder,
Yep.
and Carson Wentz was an MVP candidate 2 seasons ago before he tore his ACL. So
It's a matter
it's
of what the other players do as far as quarterbacks concerned.
yeah. I think Matt Ryan, but like I said, I think Matt Ryan has the solidest of floors, and you are going to get consistency week to week. Then that's really valuable in
At that
fantasy.
position too, it's something that you really would like because there's way too many quarterbacks that will just have those weeks where you're like, what happened?
Yeah,
What were you seeing on the field? And I think Matt Ryan very rarely has those weeks.
yeah.
But let's go into segment number 2. We're going to be going into the jukesters, the spinsters, the running backsters. Um,
Highlight stickers.
yeah, we have for our segment 2 after the big 3. So I think it's pretty much
So
everyone's. What was
I'm
that?
kind of I was gonna say I'm kind of a big 5 pending the Zeke
Yeah,
like suspension.
yeah, that
If
for
he gets
sure.
suspended, for me it's a big 4. If we're taking him out, I would include David Johnson in that with Saquon, Christian McCaffrey, Zeke, David Johnson, Kamara is my
Yeah.
top 5.
Um,
So
so after the big 5, let's say,
yeah, yeah,
um, those guys are kind of like the quarterback that we had just discussed. It's kind of cemented. Like we think that those people are really gonna.
they're
Um,
safe,
yeah, they're.
extremely high floor, extremely high upside. They're the guys
Um,
you want to get in the top. You want a top 5 pick because you want one of those guys.
yeah,
It's not very hard. You don't need analysis to tell you to pick Saquon Barkley or to pick Christian McCaffrey. They're very good at football.
yeah, they do what they're paid to
They
do.
do the damn thing.
But personally, and I think a lot of people feel this way, when you look at your top 10 rankings, somewhere between that fifth, sixth, seventh spot, you start seeing a cliff.
I get
And
really scared
I
after the top
I
5.
don't
Really
want to
scared.
pick on the back end of the first round.
Yeah.
I'm really scared. I mean, I will figure it out, but I'm not happy with
Yeah.
the running backs that we have. So,
So,
who do you love after that cliff? Who do you think
all right.
is your best bet?
I'm pretty all in on, I would say based on my rankings, I'm kind of all in on 2 people, and it's Damian Williams and Leonard Fournette.
Okay.
So with Damian Williams, I have him at number 8 among my running back rankings. And I think we saw the insanely high upside last season closing out the season with Kansas City. He had 8 touchdowns in his last 5 games, averaged 114 total yards, 18.6 touches per game. the coaching staff has been adamant all offseason and saying this is our guy. We want him to be the lead back. He recently, unfortunately, had a hamstring issue, which we don't love to see, but it's
No.
something that if you just give him the proper rest that he needs, it shouldn't be an issue. You can't overwork him too soon. So hopefully Kansas City is smart in how they address the injury. I'm going to trust them on that, but all indications are a go on Damian Williams being the feature back in probably the highest scoring offense in football. Averaged 19.6 points per game. This is half PPR by the zero point 0.5 point PPR, by the way. Over the final 4 games last year, I just think we've seen the upside. We've seen what Damian Williams can be as the feature back, and I want some of that. And number two for Leonard Fournette, I have him number 9 in my rankings, so right after Damian Williams. And I know consensus is way lower on
Oh
Leonard
yeah.
Fournette, super low. So I have him in front of people like Le'Veon Bell, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb,
Yeah.
Todd Gurley. So I am very high on Leonard Fournette, and for me, it's the additions coming back to the offensive line. So they're returning injured starters in Cam Robinson, Andrew Norwell, Brandon Linder. They drafted an offensive tackle in
Just
Jawan
huge.
Taylor.
Yeah.
I think their offensive line has pretty high upside this season, and I think Leonard Fournette, excuse me, is someone that we could pencil in as a lead candidate to lead the NFL in attempts next year. I mean, he led the NFL in attempts in 2017. We know the Jaguars want to run the hell out of the ball, and I just think he has insanely high touchdown upside and insanely high volume upside in this Jaguars offense. And there is injury concerns there, but I love him getting back a healthy offensive line. I love the Nick Foles addition to kind of stabilize the offense. I think the addition of Nick Foles is going to kind of give him a safe floor because I don't think the Jaguars are just going to have those games where they're sitting at like 6 points in the fourth quarter.
Yep.
I think they're just going to be a competent offense. They're not going to take the top off of any defense, but if the Jaguars are 20th in total offense, that could be a really good sign for Leonard Fournette because that probably means they're top 5 in rushing attempts, and that probably means that he's doing really good things for fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the year when I believe it was his rookie year, the year that I had the,
2017.
yeah, the fabled year that I drafted Leonard Fournette. Um, he
Any
he was a beast.
Yeah,
They rode him into the ground, and
absolutely.
it was a good ground to get put into. He was great, and
And
yeah, the injury concern
he's in
is
a
tough.
the injury concern is very tough, but for me, in that range, you're getting injury concern with every player. So we're just going to run through some players in that range. Dalvin Cook, injury concern. Joe
Yep.
Mixon, injury concern. Todd Gurley, injury concern. Le'Veon Bell, injury concern. He had injuries early in his career, and he's
Hmm.
coming off a season where he didn't play football. Nick Chubb, injury concern in college. Devontae Freeman. So,
Devonta
you
Freeman every season.
every season injury concern. So I think Leonard Fournette, it's anybody can get injured in football. I think he's coming into the season healthy. Another thing I like is the coaching staff has really talked up his pass catching ability. They lost TJ Yeldon in the offseason, and they haven't really done anything to address that pass catching role. So it's like all sales a go for Leonard Fournette. And this is his make or break year in Jacksonville. It's like if he doesn't do it this year, they're definitely letting him go. They're getting rid of him. So honestly, I think even if they get rid of him, I think we could see a situation like we saw with DeMarco Murray with the Cowboys, where they just ride him into the ground, give him 350 attempts if you can, and just don't re-sign him. You
Yeah,
know,
especially if if they're less than thrilled with his performance, I could totally see that happening.
off the field conduct too. It's a lot of there is red flags with him, but like I previously mentioned, I think there's red flags with all of the people in this range, and I think the upside for volume is just massive with him.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
so what about you? What
so
were you
in
thinking?
this area, I have kind of like you, I have two kind of people that I feel are dart throws. One person because they've shown it before, and one person because we haven't seen it yet. And that's someone that I know we're polar opposite on opinions is Le'Veon Bell actually.
Yeah,
Um, I've seen Le'Veon Bell be great. You've seen Le'Veon Bell be great. We also
Yep.
saw him not play last year. So it's one of those things where it is an absolute coin flip, and I feel like there's no in between. He's either going to be one of those players where you're like, how did I not draft Le'Veon Bell? Like, he was on the board. Why did I not take him? It's Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah.
And then you also have that thing where you could see him available late in the first round, maybe even into the second round, and you're like, yeah, I want nothing to do with him. He's on the Jets. So reasons that I like him. Obviously, there's not really much stats to go off last season, and he's on a new team, so it's really the great unknown. But I
Yeah.
think his pass catching ability with a young quarterback is just going to be such a match made in heaven. You have the Jets that really have more speed on their wide receiver front, and having that like surefire blanket at running back, I think will be big for Sam Darnold.
And I would
Um,
add, I would just add to that really quickly. The Chris Herndon suspension will actually help Le'Veon Bell in that regard because he's just going to gobble up those short middle of the field targets that Chris Herndon's out the first 4 games and they have a bye week, week 5, so he's out until week 6.
wow.
So that's all Lev Bell those first couple of weeks and in the middle of, besides the slot receiver. But
Yeah,
it will help Bell receiving wise. But
yeah.
go
I
on.
mean, I think that it's one of those things where we see a lot of the younger quarterbacks just really look to throw where they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And I mean, especially you look at someone like Cam Newton who has Christian McCaffrey having that
Had the
elusive
second
receiving
best
back.
passing season of his
Yeah,
career.
I mean, I really think that great things could happen there. But again, like I said, I am as excited for Le'Veon Bell this season because I feel like I'm very alone on being high on him this year. But in the same sense, I feel like he could just completely let me down.
Yes.
Um, so I
Can I
do,
get can I give you the downside real quick,
yeah,
if you don't mind, just the counter to Le'Veon Bell, why I'm a
yeah,
little bit. So Adam Gase, the Jets' new head coach, is just he is awful for fantasy purposes. We want nothing to do with Adam Gase.
yeah.
So Miami last year ranked historically low in plays per game. They ran 54.9 plays per game. This is the lowest in, I believe, like a 10-year sample that we've recorded over the last 10 years. So like he's running this, and for fantasy we need volume. We want volume. We want a lot of
We want the
touches, and
hurriest up offense you will ever see in
yeah,
your life. We want calls just coming down and being shot onto the field.
and it's just not as possible when you're just not running as many plays. And
Yeah,
then when the last time we saw Le'Veon Bell, I think we were seeing a little bit of a downturn in production. So in 2017, Le'Veon set 4-year lows in yards per carry at 4.0 and yards per touch at 4.8, and broke tackles at the lowest rate of his career. So it was almost looking like we were seeing a little bit of a downturn in the production. He was still lead at the time, but he was also running behind one of the premier elite offensive lines in
yeah. I mean,
football.
the
Like
Steelers' offensive line is it's
Bra-
up there, or at least
Brandon
when he
Thorne,
was doing.
Brandon Thorne, an offensive line guru, has the Steelers' offensive line ranked 5th, and right now he has the Jets at 28th. So a very bad offensive line, and that could hinder Le'Veon Bell's running style because everybody knows he spends a lot of
He's
time in the
patient.
backfield
Yeah,
waiting for the holes to open, waiting to see where he wants to go. And what if those holes just, what if he doesn't have time to be patient like that with the Jets? I think that's a big concern for me. So we combine the lower efficiency in 2017, the historically bad pace of play that Adam Gase has employed, and the fact that the Jets' offensive line is really shaky. I can't draft Le'Veon Bell in the first round. It's so scary for me. I would rather take a safe receiver and just know I'm gonna get the production, you
yep.
know?
Yeah, no, like I do see both sides to it, and it's
Mhm.
he's
But
definitely he's scary.
to your point, if Adam Gase, if they can just get to an average pace of play, he could have massive volume upside. And that's what we want in fantasy. We want volume. So if he stays healthy with massive volume, you know, good things could come of it as
Yeah, I
well.
mean, in our annual draft, I'm really interested to see where he goes because I think
Yeah. Him,
it
Todd
could go
Gurley.
anywhere. Yeah, I mean, it could go anywhere from people drafting based on names, and he goes like sixth,
Yeah.
or people go, "Oh, he's on the Jets. I don't want anything to do with him. Everyone's low on
Second
him,"
round.
and he goes into the second round.
Yeah.
I could see both things happening in our annual draft. So I mean, I'm like he's probably my biggest question mark. Uh, but I am excited about him. So my
Yeah.
second guy, not to take too long on the second running back,
Hmm.
but I really like Josh Jacobs. And
Absolutely.
I like him more for the fact that we don't know exactly what we're getting with him, but I know that with Derek Carr and with having that big, they have a really good pass threat if Derek Carr can actually throw the ball. They have
Yeah.
good receivers. Their offensive line is a good offensive line.
Yeah.
They have a very good, they'll have time to make these plays, and I think it's a really good situation for Josh Jacobs to just walk into.
He
You look at the
so
Raiders as a team that may be dysfunctional because of all the change they've been going through. With, I mean, you lose Khalil Mack, I'd say that's a pretty good sign you're dysfunctional.
and Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, you're losing people in that sense, and they seem like a dumpster fire. But if you look at what he's walking into as far as an established offense, or what will be an established offense, I think he could walk into a really nice situation.
Yeah, I mean, we don't care about dumpster fire like GMs in fantasy. We just care about the ability for volume, the chance to be a high volume player, and Josh Jacobs clearly has that. So the Raiders, they tried to sign Isaiah Crowell. He unfortunately, I believe, it was tore his Achilles, so he's going to be out for the season. So in desperation, they had to sign old Doug Martin back to the squad, but they don't want to use Josh. They not Josh. They don't want to use Doug Martin. That
No.
was why they didn't re-sign him originally. So they want Josh Jacobs to be the guy. I think I'm pretty low on Derek Carr, but even with
Yeah.
that being said, this offense has extremely high upside. Just a couple years ago, we saw people talking about Derek Carr as an MVP candidate,
Oh yeah.
and this offense looking like great. So, say if everything does go right, Antonio Brown does hit, and Josh Jacobs, someone who showed an extremely versatile skill set at Alabama, being able to catch the ball out of the backfield and just an extremely good runner, 14 touchdowns on 140 touches in 2018. So he showed an ability to get in the end zone. He showed an ability to just versatile skill set back that can do a lot of things for a team that doesn't have a lot of other options at his position. I'm absolutely in on Jacobs. I think he could have a great year.
Yeah, those are my two guys. Definitely two opposite players. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that this second part, I can't wait till the middle to end of the season to listen back to this and like
Oh yeah.
just look back on like what happened, because I feel like I feel like the running back category after these elite guys is just going to be such like a
It's
shuffle.
that
It's going to be our rankings on shuffle. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's like that 5 to 20 range could go anywhere. It
Yeah.
could really be it's a shuffle like you said. It could be anything. So I'm really excited to see how that turns out.
Yep. So when we go into our next segment, we're going to be talking about wide receivers, and when is the best time to grab your wide receiver,
Mhm.
and do you think it's worth reaching for an elite tier player? Let's say you get that sixth, seventh pick, or maybe even
Uh-huh.
the fifth. Do you think it's worth going for those people that could be on the board, or do you think you're better off going with the two running back strategy?
So for me, I'm if I get a top 5 pick, I'm taking a running back. I'm taking one of those top 5 running backs barring an Ezekiel Elliott suspension. But once we get to pick 6, that's when I'm going all in on wide receivers.
Yep.
I'm pretty uninterested in the running backs beyond like the Le'Veon Bell, the Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook range of ADP. I'm kind of out on those running backs. So for me, I'm strongly attacking the wide receivers in that range, and I absolutely think it's worth once you get to pick 6 to go after the wide receiver strong and go for an elite wide receiver. And I'm not opposed to say if you get a back of the end round 1 pick. So if you're in a 12-person league, say you get like 11 or 12, or a 10-person league, say you get like 10 or 9. I'm not opposed to taking two wide receivers back to back and just assuring two of those elite wide receivers, because I think there's a clear 7 elite wide receivers in fantasy this year, and I want to get one, if not two of those.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't get one of the five running backs, you might as well get one of the other seven wide receivers. I mean,
Yeah.
you really, if your team
For
isn't
me,
going
it's
to be balanced out by one, it needs to be stacked in the other.
for me, it's just not worth the risk of the running backs once you're beyond the top 4 or 5. When you know you're going to get surefire production from these wide receivers year after year, and you don't even have to think about it. You just
Yeah.
walk into great stats year in and year out. So that's my strategy when it comes to the first round this year with wide receivers. I think it's absolutely okay to reach for one, if not two, if you're outside of those top 4, top 5. Yeah.
Yeah, so where do you have because when we first discussed doing our rankings, Tyreek Hill was still up in the air, and I know in the past, I believe it was like about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, was when we found out that he was reinstated. So where do you have him sliding into your rankings?
So I have Tyreek, I believe right now my computer's actually like giving me some crap, but I believe I have him wide receiver 6.
Okay.
So I think the upside is immensely high. He was wide receiver 1 in both PPR and non-PPR last year, so we know what he can do. He can take the top off of a defense, but I believe the wide receivers I have in front of him are um, Odell Beckham, Julio. This is not in order, by the way.
Yeah.
Odell Beckham, Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, and DeAndre Hopkins. So in Devontae Adams, he's been a guy that's been in double-digit touchdowns the last 3 seasons. He's Aaron Rodgers' clear number one. We've heard Aaron Rodgers say he wants to throw him the ball more. So I just love all of that, honestly. I love
Yeah.
all of that. With DeAndre Hopkins, he's just been a model of consistency. He's missed, I believe, one game in his career. He's been like 1,400, 1,300 yards, double digit touchdowns essentially every year. He's as surefire of a pick as you can get. Julio Jones is someone who's been over 1,400 yards each of the last uh 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. So he's been over 1,400 yards each of the last 5 seasons. The injury concerns that were some concerns early in his career have virtually vanished. So he is very surefire. And then Odell Beckham with Baker Mayfield, I think the sky is like uh, I feel like the sky is the roof. I'll go with the Michael Jordan quote because this guy has like the utmost upside in with Baker Mayfield throwing him the ball. We saw in Odell Beckham's like peak season with Eli Manning, we saw insane upside. He had in 16 games, 101 catches, 1,000. No, excuse me, in 15 games, he had 96 catches, 1,450 yards, and 13 touchdowns. So, what separates me from him and Tyreek Hill is he can give you like elite yards, receptions, and touchdowns if all things hit right. Whereas with Hill, he's probably going to give you elite yards and touchdowns, but the receptions won't be like quite as high. So I think it's like it's very close when you're trying to pick nits at the elite tier, but that's why I have Odell slightly ahead of Tyreek Hill. But I love Tyreek Hill this year.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say someone that was the number one and someone that just performed so well as highlight reels every week
Yeah.
isn't going to be in that top five, top six,
Yeah,
top seven range. Um, Back onto Odell Beckham real quick, if you don't mind.
of course.
I'm really high on Odell Beckham also. I wouldn't say I'm an Odell fan, but if he can put up the stats that you had listed before with Eli, which is someone who has been known to kind of take blind shots, but he's really just kind of a short to medium thrower, and you have him stacking up with stats against Tyreek Hill, who's all bombs. It could be really good with Baker Mayfield, especially with his accuracy. But my
Yeah.
question is, how do you feel about Jarvis Landry? Do you think he can take some of that, or do you think he's going to be a compliment and that they're going to kind of do you think they're going to trade weeks? Like, where do you
So
see Jarvis Landry falling in the fantasy world?
so for me, going into the season, I was quite off on Jarvis Landry. I wasn't really interested in taking him anywhere in the draft, and I still actually haven't found a draft where I have taken him, but I've kind of opened myself up to the idea of taking him more recently. So for me, I think Odell is going to get his every week. I don't think his targets are going to be a concern whatsoever. He's going
No,
to
I
get
don't either.
so, but for Jarvis, I think he might be a little more up and down. He's going to man the slot, whereas last year his depth of target was way up for against his career average. I think it might go a little bit more back down towards his career average, but I still think he's going to have a pretty high floor because when you just think about it, you want in fantasy, you want to be a part of these elite offenses and these offenses that we think are going to be elite. Think of the Chiefs last year, someone like a Sammy Watkins, there because of injury and other factors, there was weeks where he was practically zeros, but he also showed the insane upside when you just play in a high octane offense. And I think Jarvis is going to have a couple of those weeks in this Browns offense. I think he's bound to score a couple of touchdowns, and those touchdowns are probably going to be supplemented with games where he has stat lines like 6 catches for 80 yards. He might not be the highest upside player, but I think he's going to be pretty stable, and he's going to flash a couple of weeks throughout the season where he hits 20 to 25 points.
So you
So
see him and Odell as more of a Julio and Sanu, and not so much of a Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, where they're not really complements.
yeah,
They're kind of offsetting on certain weeks, but both are good players to have.
absolutely. Or I'd even say Julio and Calvin Ridley, I think would be
Yeah,
great
I'd say yeah,
comparison.
probably the more recent comparison
Yeah,
with him last year.
yeah, like I don't think Jarvis has that touchdown upside of Calvin Ridley, who was at 10 touchdowns last year.
Yeah,
But I think he's gonna be what he is in fantasy. He's a good football player. So I think they're still gonna try and get him the ball because he's probably someone that if he isn't getting the ball, Jarvis is gonna let the offense know it. So they're gonna
yeah,
try and keep all the chefs happy in the kitchen,
oh
and
yeah.
they're gonna try and
They have a lot.
distribute. Yeah, they do have a lot of chefs, but they're gonna. I think so. Last year he was at 81 catches, 976 yards, and 4 touchdowns. I would expect him honestly around the same stat line because when we saw him early on in the season in the featured role, he wasn't doing much with the targets that he was getting. So he had a lot of targets last year. He was at 149 targets on the season,
Wow.
but he had a 54.4% catch rate, and he was someone the 4 seasons before that he was at 75%, 66%, 71%, 60. So he was someone that was a lot more consistent in producing on his targets. So I think next year he might be able to produce on the targets on easier said targets than last year when his average depth of target went like 4 yards up. I think he's going to be getting easier targets, and because of that, he's going to catch more balls despite less targets, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I know that was a lot of target talk in the last 2 minutes, but just to sum it up really quickly, I think he's going to get less targets but catch a higher percentage of balls on said targets and basically supplement into what he was last season.
yeah. Just a better condensed player, basically, not so
Yeah,
sporadic and spread out.
yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where that's where I
Where
see
you
him as
feel?
well. I don't see him so much as a flashy guy.
Yeah.
And then for my kind of like last touch on wide receiver before we move on, what do you think Juju's going to be like without Antonio Brown? Where do you see?
Oof.
I have him. I'm kind of high on Juju. I am a fan of Juju, but I'm also a fan of his production.
Mm.
Um, but we haven't seen his production without AB. So to say we like his production, it's a question mark, in my opinion. Where do you have him ranked roughly, or where do you like him?
Yeah. So I honestly couldn't be higher on Juju this year. I initially had him third in my wide receiver rankings, just behind Devontae and DeAndre Hopkins. But
Awesome.
I've probably come a little bit down on that. I might have him. He's right around Odell for me. I don't know if I want him in front of Odell, behind Odell, like right in that Odell Tyreek Hill range for me.
Yep.
But I think massive, massive upside for Juju. So last year he was third in targets in the NFL, and the Steelers are missing 227 targets from last year.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a player who could take over that number one role in a Steelers offense, which we've seen Antonio Brown in the last couple of years, and that is so valuable for fantasy. Like the last year, he was at 111 catches, 1,426 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I don't think it's unplausible for him to get into the double digit, like 12, 13, even 14 touchdown range, because we saw Antonio Brown as the number one in this receiver routinely around that. And I think this is going to lead to more red zone targets for Juju because that's an area where we routinely saw Antonio Brown hogging up targets. So I think his upside is just massive. I am all in on Juju,
Yeah, I
all
also
in.
don't see a scenario where he doesn't get fed the ball. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't see where
he's
Big Ben is scared to throw it to him because one, he's already shown that Juju is his. I
Juju's a
mean,
number one wide receiver. He's shown it in the NFL. He has the
yeah,
talent of a number one wide. Like, there's been people that have talked about, is he going to be as good without Antonio Brown? I'm really not scared about that because I think he has the talent of all of these other number one wide receivers in the NFL.
yeah.
He's shown it with his breakaway plays. And, like, I'm not concerned about that really at all. I think they're still going to use him in the slot where they've used him the last couple of years. Like, they're going to deploy him really smart, just like the Saints still use Michael Thomas in the slot, you know? They'll find smart ways to get him the ball. I am all in on Juju. Like I said, I think the sky is the limit for him.
Yeah, I have him ranked just below Julio Jones. I have Juju at sixth.
Yeah.
So I mean, I really do think he could have one of those big years, and I think that also, I mean, even if he does still play in the slot where he was before, I think you do get a little bit of that confusion going in where people are going to be game planning against him because they don't know. Defenses aren't going to know what the Steelers are going to come out in. The Steelers could be really creative and they don't have that dual threat of having AB and Juju. They really could focus him, and defenses don't know how to handle it, especially with having James Conner too. They really could come out in different ways of getting him the ball.
It's a huge question mark as to how that offense is going to operate next season. But last season, we saw Pittsburgh essentially running an offense where Ben Roethlisberger was the offensive coordinator. But they didn't have Todd Haley for the first time in years, and they just basically went all in on Big Ben calling the plays at the line of scrimmage. And in doing so, I think it was third in attempts they were number one in pass attempts last season. So I'm honestly just expecting more of the same. I think while I like Antonio Brown, I still think he could be a good player in Oakland. I think he was clearly on the decline, and I don't think just like this offense didn't miss Le'Veon Bell much. I really don't think it's going to miss Antonio Brown much. I think they're going to still be a highly productive offense. I think Dante Moncrief is going to fill in greatly in the
Oh
number
yeah,
two wide receiver slot, and which is another reason why I'm not as concerned about Juju because Dante Moncrief is a burner who could take the top off of defenses and allow Juju to operate in the middle of the field where he works best. And like I said, I see great things for Juju this year
yeah,
for sure.
definitely not worried in that front. So that's gonna wrap it up for wide receivers. So we're just gonna quickly go into tight ends to try and keep this not too long. So for our final segment, we're gonna go into tight ends. We obviously do have a big three.
Yeah.
Um, what happens if you somehow miss out on all three tight ends?
So in previous seasons, I was pretty adamant on my strategy. I wanted a top three tight end. It was the strategy I employed last year. It was the strategy I believe I employed the year before that. It's so surefire when every other team in the league, basically every other team in the league, is just struggling, gambling on different tight ends from the waiver wire every week. It's such a secure feeling knowing you have somebody you can just lock into that tight end slot every single week. And for me, I always felt confident in my both my late round picks and my waiver wire ability at both the running back and wide receiver positions where I felt like I could afford to miss out on around two or three wide receiver running back because I felt like I'd be able to hit a late round sleeper or hit on the waiver wire. Whereas it's a lot harder. There really isn't late round sleepers at tight end or waiver wire sleepers at tight end. Very
No.
rarely. Like Eric Ebron last year was the very rare case of a tight end coming up on the waiver wire and actually being someone you could start without hesitation every week and not get like single digit production. So
And even that, people weren't really catching on to him until like Thanksgiving.
yeah,
I mean, he
it
was
took
one of
a
the people
while.
where they're like, oh, this is gonna be the last week. This is gonna be the last week, and then we see it happen week after week, where he wound up bringing in just under 14 points per game in
Yeah,
I believe that was in standard.
yeah.
He had a good
And he
season,
got
and
PPR, by the way.
a lot of those teams, a lot of those tight ends, excuse me, you really can see them coming in anywhere from 12 to, I mean, Kelsey has a lot, but in that 12 to 15 range of fantasy points per week. That's You need that. That's not
Yeah,
something you can joke around with, because if you have a tight end that's very inconsistently bringing you in anywhere from like 3 to 11 points, those are
I'm
points
telling
you
you.
you can't leave on the board.
Yeah, I mean,
Those
when
points
you're
will lose you weeks.
consistently starting out every week, you could basically say every week, all right, I'm starting this week up plus 10 points because every week my tight end is going to outscore his tight end by 10 points.
Yeah.
So if I'm starting every week up by 10, can I basically just stay even with the rest of my position? And I'm usually like, I don't want to come across as too cocky, but I'm usually very confident that I'm going to be able to draft well enough in the later rounds or pick up the waiver wire guys that I'm not concerned about wasting an early round pick on a tight end. But with that being said, I actually think my tight end strategy has changed a little bit this year because in previous seasons, I thought the mid-round value at tight end was super poor. I was not willing to take a gamble on a Greg Olson or a Delaney Walker or some of those, or like a Jordan Reed who's injured every year.
Yeah, those
Like
those off top five guys.
I was not willing to just gamble on those guys in the middle of rounds. Like I felt like it was just so much more valuable to take the surefire guy, the surefire tight end at the top. But now this year we have guys like Evan Ingram, OJ Howard, Hunter Henry, Vance McDonald. I think all of these guys have massive upside, like close to that upside of like a Zach Ertz. I think Evan Ingram, he was on pace, 88 catches, 1,280 yards, and 4 touchdowns without Odell Beckham last year. Granted, that was in 4 games, but we've seen his upside without Odell. He was number 2 in the NFL in yards after the catch per reception at 9 yards. So he's shown massive upside in running the ball after the catch. He's shown the ability without Odell Beckham to be a feature receiver on the offense. Golden Tate just took a 4 game suspension. So I mean, I'm pretty high on Evan
Those
Ingram.
targets have to go
Um,
somewhere, and they can't throw to Saquon 60 times a game.
as much as they'd like to.
As much as they want to, they've got to go somewhere.
And then I mean, we move on to OJ Howard. The Buccaneers are missing 220 plus targets from last season, and he's someone who was at 16.6 yards per catch, 11.5 yards per target, and 18.3% touchdown rate in his career. Those are like absolute elite numbers. Being over 11 and a half yards per target was something we've never seen from Zach Ertz. We've never seen that from Travis Kelsey. We saw that one time in Rob Gronkowski's career. So OJ Howard has shown elite ability. He just needs to stay on the field and get the proper snaps. And I think with the Buccaneers hiring Bruce Arians at head coach, employing a smart head coach, he's going to keep his best players on the field. I think it's a really simple strategy that most smart coaches follow. Hunter Henry, we've seen massive upside in on 115 targets in his career. He's put up an 81 catches, 1,057 yards, and 12 touchdown stat line. So if we're expecting 80 to 90 targets this season. We're expecting a pretty good year from Hunter Henry. And then to finish off with Vance McDonald, as we mentioned earlier with Juju, the Steelers missing 227 targets. And Vance was actually third in the NFL in yards after catch per reception at 7.9. So once again, a guy that showed elite run after the catch ability. So all of these mid-round tight ends, I really like all of these guys. So I have actually no problem this year skipping out on tight end, maybe stacking up my wide receivers in the first 2 rounds, taking someone like a Devontae Freeman or a Leonard Fournette in the third round, and then getting a tight end in the fourth round. I'm completely okay with that strategy.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where a lot of these tight ends, too, you can see that their production has gone up as the league has moved into this like super pass
Yeah,
heavy offense, as to where you would see a lot of tight ends. Maybe the league was formerly split 50-50 on blocking tight ends and receiving tight ends, and now you have guys that are wide receivers lining up on the line.
Evan
So
Ingram is a wide receiver
yeah, I
too.
mean Evan
You
Ingram.
know,
Yeah, you
they're like
look
a
at guys.
4-3.
Yeah, you look at guys like that where, um, a lot of these guys they're getting fast and they're becoming like really just oversized wide receivers. So, like you said with OJ Howard, another guy I'm really high on this year is Austin Hooper. Um,
Absolutely,
I
he's
I
my
love
next
him.
guy in my rankings. I just could he was the cutoff for the tier with Vance, so I didn't mention him. But I absolutely love Austin Hooper.
Yeah,
He'll go
I
on.
there's so many people that I ranked 13 tight ends, and if you told me any of these guys were going to be my tight end going into this year, I
I'd
really
be okay
wouldn't
with
be
it,
that
right?
upset.
For me, all right, so for me, for drafting, I want to target one of my top 8 tight ends. I feel like after my top 8, which includes Austin Hooper in the top 7 that I just mentioned,
Hmm.
that's when I start to get a little uncomfortable with tight end. If I have to start a Jared Cook, an Eric Ebron, a Jordan Reed, a David and Joe, like I'm a little scared about that group.
Yeah, I
That
don't
group I
want
don't
any of
feel
those
great
guys.
about. But those for me, that top 8, and I'll include Austin Hooper real quick. He was 7th in tight end targets last year and third amongst tight ends at targets inside the 10. So he's getting good targets and he's getting valuable targets inside the 10, the red zone targets. And Falcons coaching staff has been pretty high on him this offseason. I mean, we can't get too invested in coach speak, but we like to hear reports like that. I think Austin Hooper is not only safe, but he provides solid upside from week to week. So I would include him in that top 8 tight ends that I would like to have on my team.
Yeah, I mean, and something that we've definitely been doing in best ball, or something. I mean, I've done it
Yeah,
in almost every pick. Is really trying to get two of these top 8 guys.
I've
If you're in a best ball league and you have the ability to take two of these guys, you're guaranteeing, almost guaranteeing, that you're going to be getting very elite performance in your points category at that
I
tight end spot.
I couldn't tell you how many leagues I've gone Vance McDonald, Austin Hooper at tight end. And I'm saying, all right, so now for my 16 weeks, I'm almost positive like 12 of those weeks I'm going to get great tight end production.
Yeah.
And maybe the other 4 weeks I get like 8 to 10 points and I'm completely okay with that. But I completely agree. I think targeting two of those top 8 guys in best ball is absolutely optimal to just ensure that all 16 weeks you're getting elite production.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as just something to wrap up with on the tight ends, you look at players like Hunter Henry, Vance McDonald, Jared Cook, all these guys, and honestly, even Evan Ingram, all of these guys are going through changes at the wide receiver position on their team.
Yep. There's
So
targets available. There's a
yeah,
lot of targets
targets are
available
up
in
for
all four of
grabs.
those teams.
And they've got to go somewhere. So someone like you said with Evan Ingram, I think him and Vance McDonald probably are going to be seeing, because I mean Odell and Antonio Brown are two of the top
Target
elite
hogs.
wide receivers. They're target hogs, and those numbers got to go somewhere. So uh, I wouldn't be as nervous as in years past. Just to wrap up that tight end, I think
Yeah,
you're okay if you don't get Kelsey. You don't have to panic.
absolutely. I think you, for me, I want Kelsey is still in a tier of his own. For me, George Kittle is above Zach Ertz. Like I distinctly want George Kittle, and I'm not too high on Zach Ertz, where I feel like his ADP is a little higher than I'm willing to take him, which is why if I don't get Kelsey or Kittle, I'm not panicking. Like you said, I'm completely okay targeting anywhere in that 4 to 8 range and feeling pretty safe week to week. Like I'm not gonna have to go waiver wire shopping every week.
Yeah, and the reason we cover things like that and say that the reason you shouldn't panic is, it's one thing to do your homework on your drafting and everything, and it's one thing to say, all right, this is where I have so and so ranked, and this is what I'm doing here. It's another thing to actually do it on draft night when the clock's counting down,
Yep.
and it's something you really want to look out for. You don't want to have, let's say you're a little weak at running back, and you have one of those guys that, let's say you have ranked at somewhere in the 15 to 20 spot. you don't want to take a tight end that you're not in love with when you could easily just get depth at another position when that clock's counting
Absolutely.
down. So
Don't.
I
I would
I
say I would
sorry.
say to that note, don't pigeonhole yourself into a strategy. Don't. Last year, I was pretty set on the strategy that I wanted one of those elite tight ends. But say if everybody just went super high on the tight ends and I couldn't get one of the elite ones, don't panic and take your fourth tight end way higher than you would have just because you feel like, oh, I have to get my tight end now. No, just reevaluate your board, take the best player available, and then let the ADPs come to you where you look at your tiers and you say, all right, I still have OJ Howard, Hunter Henry, and Vance McDonald. So once one or two of those players go, that's when I start thinking, all right, I need to take a tight end. But don't pigeonhole, like, don't be so set on a strategy that if God forbid if that strategy doesn't come to fruition, you start panicking and you make bad decisions. You have to be prepared to pivot on a swing at any point in a fantasy draft.
Yeah, which is why I'm as soon as the mocks are available to go every year, I usually just do mocks way too early, just to get a
Best
feel
practice
for
you
it.
can get. It
Yeah,
really is.
those mock drafts, and we've been doing best balls on draft.com,
Draft.
and that's really, I mean, it's one of the things where it's basically just dollar mock drafts, but you're getting a lot of good practice with that. And those are 30-second drafts. We've had plenty of times where both of us have come down to 1 second, 2 seconds, and we really, it's
It's good practice
that
being against the
pressure.
clock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that pressure is really good practice. Like Chris said, having the draft come to you and not worrying is such having that draft composure is huge. You see something that happens, I'd say probably every year, is you get that run on
Panic
quarterbacks
picks.
a little earlier than it always seems to be earlier than it should.
Always.
You get that run on quarterbacks, and instead of being the person to take the fourth quarterback or fifth quarterback because you're panicking now, you look at it
Take the
as the
seventh
mindset
quarter
as
take the
okay,
seventh quarterback that's in the same tier as your fourth quarterback.
yeah.
You know?
You can also look at it as okay, well, all these guys just drafted quarterbacks. That's half the league now that doesn't need a quarterback for a couple rounds.
Exactly.
You've given
That's
yourself, instead of looking at it as a panic situation, you've just given yourself more time because
yeah.
all of them just jumped, and now you can play safe and you can pick off those wide receivers and those running backs and those tight ends that they left for another 10 picks because or 12 picks because they decided to go up for their quarterback.
And I would say kind of to that point really quick, don't take a quarterback high. It is really not worth it. Like,
No.
I'm looking through my quarterback rankings right now. I have Ben Roethlisberger ninth, Matt Ryan eighth, and they're at 22.2 and 21.3 fantasy points per game respectively last year. My number two quarterback and number three, Deshaun Watson and Andrew Luck, they're at 20.7, 20.5. Like, quarterback, it's so close from top to bottom unless you're getting like head over heels value for your pick. Like I said earlier, look at it like, all right, so the top four just went. Now let me play out my tiers here and let me try and get a guy that's in the same tier as like my fifth ranked quarterback. If say my eighth ranked quarterback is like in the same tier, let me try and work it and work it and work it and wait and wait and wait and wait until I can get that eighth quarterback because just getting value at quarterback allows you to build out the rest of your roster so well. And it's honestly for me, it's the number one mistake that like rookie fantasy players make. We've seen it in our drafts where like
Oh
Aaron
yeah.
Rodgers will go in the first round, and it's like, why? Why are you doing this to yourself? Especially because quarterback is such a unrepeatable position in a way. Like you can be very consistent from year to year, but we've seen over the last 15 years, the number one quarterback in fantasy the next year basically is never repeated. I believe I could be wrong with 1 year, but even the
Peyton did it
historic
once.
Peyton no, I was gonna say even the historic Peyton Manning year in 2013 or 2014 with the Broncos, where he threw like 5,500 yards, 50 touchdowns. The next year he had an amazing year. Still threw for over 4,600 yards, 40 touchdowns, or like 39, and he was the number four quarterback in fantasy. Nobody was angry with Peyton Manning that year. He still had a great season. But the
Yeah, if
odds of
Patrick
you
Mahomes doesn't
repeating the
give you your
next
32 a game, you're not gonna get mad at
yeah,
him. If he gives you your
and
26, then you're okay with it.
exactly. And we already kind of started to see Pat Mahomes regress to the mean a little bit, like what I was talking about earlier in the podcast, where you can't expect him to have an 8.6% touchdown rate next season. You just can't expect him to throw 50 touchdowns. Everybody loves Patrick Mahomes. Everybody thinks he's great, but it's just unrealistic to expect. So don't draft these quarterbacks super, super high when you can get really similar production later in the draft. Like Cam Newton is going past pick 100 for sure, and he easily has like MVP upside, you know? And so to see Pat Mahomes go top 30, top 40, and then Cam Newton going 100 plus, Carson Wentz going 100 plus, I think is just a little
It's
ridiculous for me.
insane. If anything, find your middle ground.
Exact.
But I
That's what
mean,
that would be my biggest advice is don't take the top quarterback, but don't be the last person to take a quarterback.
yeah,
You want to be in that middle ground where you're still getting an elite talent. And for me, last year that was Andrew Luck. I believe we went over it, and he was like the seventh quarterback taken in our draft last year.
yeah,
So I didn't want one of those top quarterbacks last year because I didn't want to overpay. But for me, Andrew Luck was the last elite talent that provided like top. Like it was plausible that he could have a top three quarterback season, and that's what I wanted. So that would be my advice in when it comes to quarterbacks.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely the one position that I feel like everyone wants to get the guy they like. And it's a position where everyone wants to have the glamorous number one guy that was ranked number one last year. But it's really you gotta be smart with it.
Yeah,
It's the position that can really shoot you in the foot too.
absolutely.
But yeah,
100%.
I think on that note, we are going to wrap up our first episode of the Kids Podcast. Um, hope you enjoyed this. Definitely is the longer of our podcast, but we just kind of wanted to get all the the housewarming stuff out of the way and just really introduce you to what we're trying to do. And we look forward to the next episode and the next couple topics that we cover.
Absolutely. I think we'll be doing some like team previews, some division previews, some like position previews where we'll go more in depth into each position where we kind of just glossed over these positions. But absolutely we'll have a lot of great content coming out for the season and hope you guys enjoyed and hope you guys keep stay tuned for what's coming out.
Yeah, we're gonna be posting this to YouTube and trying to get it on iTunes, trying to get it as many places as we can. But it'll definitely be a process. And with each episode, we'll keep you updated as to where you can find it.
Well, and really quickly before we end off, if you want to just follow us so you know where to stay tuned, Austin's Twitter is at AJD0224, correct?
Yep, that's me.
And my Twitter is at ChrisS0417. So whenever this is live, we will tweet that out. And, same thing with like getting it up on Apple Podcasts and whatnot. So just follow us there and you can stay tuned for all the updates. So
For
wrap
sure.
us out of here, Austin.
We'll see you.
Later.